Trying to measure the difficulty of Geometry Dash numerically and scientifically seems like an impossible task. The game's community for years has tried to standardize and rank levels based on difficulty, but the reality is that difficulty always contains a subjective component. But that doesn't need to mean that giving it a try is pointless, because if we look very closely at the game's hardest levels, we find many elements that not only allow us to better understand the game's current difficulty, but also allow us to speculate where the game's actual human limit might be relative to human biopsychology. And in today's video, we'll be taking a look at just that. I think there's no doubt that one of the levels that best catapulted the popularity of Geometry Dash outside of the game's own community was Slaughterhouse and the controversy around it. The level was officially verified by top player Doggy Dasher in late 2021. For anyone watching from outside the community though, you may not know that before this player's completion, the level was beaten using hacks by another of 2021's supposedly top players, Space UK. This level caught the attention of a popular streamer called XQC, who reacted to Zoink's completion of Slaughterhouse on stream. Since then, the game's caught attention from numerous other big name streamers like Jinxie, Moist Critical, who even covered the Space UK fiasco by the way, and even iShowSpeed, who reacted to a showcase of the level Acheron on stream. I still also see why Slaughterhouse might be the hardest looking level to new players if you were to show it to them side by side with something like Acheron, Tidal Wave, or even Every End. That's the main reason why I've decided to start with this level, because it's a good way to help people from both in and outside the community to understand its difficulty. But the second reason is just as important, and it's that the harder the level is, the easier its difficulty is to apply numerical measurements to, thanks to these. Oh my. Some of the jumps you just saw were frame perfect. I'm sure a lot of gamers will already be familiar with this term, but for anyone who isn't, here's a little rundown. A frame perfect input is one that has to be performed within a single frame of the game's animation with the game's physics and mechanics taken into account. Generally, frame perfects are measured at a rate of 60 frames per second because that's the standard rate for most monitors. But as even more difficult levels have been verified, the community has begun measuring them at 120 FPS and even 360 in some videos, but we'll get onto that in a second. So applying this logic to the jumps I just made on Slaughterhouse, if I jump one frame too early or one frame too late, you are basically guaranteed to lose. And remember, FPS is frames per second. With 60 of those, you have 1/60th of a second to pass the jump, or 0.0167 seconds. Slaughterhouse has 65 frame perfect jumps. 65. There's this really great channel called LeeTimGD who makes these videos that are like levels with frame perfect counters, and every time there's a frame perfect you'll hear a ding, so just listen to this. Slaughterhouse was by no means the first level to have these though. In fact, by the time the level was verified, numerous levels that were previously considered the hardest had plenty of them too. The level Firework, for example, verified by top player Trick in October of 2021 with 23 frame perfects. The level Tartar Sauce, verified by Dolphy in January of 2022 with 22 frame perfects. Or even Zodiac, verified in April of 2019 by Technical, which is believed to contain about 9. Thanks to the time machine feature on the community moderated Geometry Dash Demon List website, we can see where these levels were ranked relative to Slaughterhouse at the time of its verification. Slaughterhouse containing almost triple the amount of frame perfects as the level second to it in difficulty. So to reiterate, 65 frame perfects in a level that's 70 seconds long, often with several of those frame perfects within 1 second. There are so many other elements that make Slaughterhouse and basically every top level in the game so difficult besides frame perfects. They're just not measurable. For example, the confusing transitions, the nerves, the poor readability, or even just the fact that some people are more comfortable with other game modes than others, of which there were 7 at the time of the level's release and 8 now, each with its own different gameplay and physics. So how many people have beaten this level now? Maybe 5 people, 10 people? Maybe 20 at a push? Well, actually no. As of the time of the video's making, this level has 150 plus victors. You see, here's the thing about Slaughterhouse. The level turns 5 years old this year. Players often take hundreds of thousands of attempts to beat it, one notable example being the player Doritos1055, who spent 736,236 attempts to beat it. That's definitely one of the highest, if not the highest, but it's not uncommon for players to dedicate hundreds of thousands of attempts in favor of trying to beat this level. But in today's times, we have W pop off casually beating the level 3 times in a row. What? It turns out that if we look at some real-world scientific research, we can safely conclude that 60 FPS frame perfects aren't actually that hard for the brain to do. MIT research shows that timing is handled by networks of neurons that can stretch or compress their activity depending on the required precision, meaning that your brain can dynamically adjust timing depending on the task, whether that task be 9 circles or tidal wave or something. The same article also describes that your timing circuits can compress their activity to hit tighter and tighter windows with training, making it truly remarkable with the right practice. And if we look even further into psychological sources, the Journal of Neuroscience notes that everyday behaviors like speaking, driving, and reacting require timing on the scale of milliseconds anyway. So technically your brain isn't a stranger to frame perfects. Here's the real secret though. A lot of players when describing a frame perfect might say something like, it's a timing where you only have 1/60th of a second to react. And while there's nothing wrong with saying this, of course, it may not be a scientifically correct statement. A person's typical reaction time is around 0.2 seconds, which is ridiculously longer than the duration of a frame perfect. In the Journal of Neuroscience, it's described that humans rely much more on predictive motor control rather than reaction, which essentially means that while it may feel like you're reacting to what you see on screen, more accurately, you're executing a script that your brain has pre-downloaded and adjusted over time, which is why these levels are just impossible to beat on your first few tries. They're made to be played thousands and thousands of times over. It's a bit like playing a musical instrument like the piano, for example. They're both tasks that require timing, yes, but more importantly, they both rely on predictive motor timing and not reaction. You could dedicate as long as you wanted to learning the first 50% of Slaughterhouse, but fluking the level from 50% without ever having seen or practiced the next 50% is scientifically very unlikely, if not impossible, because the brain can't react to unseen stimuli that fast. But there's another scientific conclusion we can reach, and that is that Slaughterhouse is nowhere near the human limit. Still though, clearly it's a pretty hard thing for the average person to attempt. And by the end of this video, we want to understand how hard Geometry Dash is and how hard it can get. So it's worth taking this point to realize that Slaughterhouse has 21 levels considered to be harder than it. 21 levels harder than this. And at this point, do we even need to do a full analysis of levels like Acheron, Tidal Wave, or Avernus? And go ahead and skip to the hardest level in the game to see how that compares. Meet Thinking Space 2, the game's current hardest verified challenge. If you thought Slaughterhouse with 65 was a lot, consider this one with 108 on 60 FPS, and 20 frame perfect on 120 FPS, which as you can probably imagine are jumps that only give you 1/120th of a second to jump. This obviously makes the level so hard because when you have so many frame perfects, you can only imagine— Wait. Remember how I said there were so many other elements to Geometry Dash difficulty that just aren't so easy to measure numerically? I think there is another level we need to look at. This level is Booba Wamba. It's ranked 7th and currently only has 2 victors, with surprisingly only 35 frame perfects, less than Slaughterhouse, and less than many levels below it. But how can this be harder than Slaughterhouse? Well, there are 2 main reasons why, and those 2 reasons are the 2 elements of difficulty that Slaughterhouse doesn't test anywhere near as much as Booba Wamba. The first one is obviously the poor visibility, but the other element that's tested is memory, which kind of go hand in hand, to be honest. And the way memory research applies to Geometry Dash memory levels is genuinely very interesting. Even if you're not hugely familiar with Geometry Dash community levels, you may still recognize the level Limbo, based on the fact that it's one of the most viewed showcases in the game, but it's been overtaken for a long time, and not just by Booba Wamba. So how close is this level to the human limit? Well, first let's explain Booba Wamba's most important gimmick that separates it from every other level on the demon list. There are 5 objects scattered around the level at certain percentages, and you need to pay very close attention to whether they show up or not. And they are minuscule things like a little saw blade or something. You then have to remember which ones showed up and which ones didn't, and click a trigger for the ones that didn't show up. Measuring this numerically and objectively is very difficult, but we can speculate a little using this cognitive memory model. It seems to be known by a few names. I personally know it as the multi-store memory model. The human working memory capacity is somewhere between 7 to 9 chunks of information at once, though it can be less. Memory demons like like Bubawamba or Limbo force players to compress patterns into chunks, link those chunks into sequences, and offload those chunks into the long-term memory through repetition. With repetition, the brain shifts from declarative memory, which is kind of like saying, don't forget to click after the green orb, don't forget to click after the green orb, don't forget to I just kind of do it. But the trend is the same really, because you're relying on trained prediction, not reaction. Back to Bubawamba specifically though, when you combine invisible gameplay with a never seen before memory gimmick, with a bunch of routes you need to memorize, with 2 minutes of gameplay and 35 frame perfects, you know you've cooked up something pretty difficult. Frame perfects are a lot harder to hit if you can't even see them. The difference in skill required to beat these levels is immense, and we haven't even started discussing Thinking Space 2. I guess we'll do that, shall we? For those who don't know, this level was actually verified alongside another level intended to be top 1, called Amethyst, verified by W. Popoff, and the levels were verified on the exact same day, just hours apart from each other.
Two top ones in one day, bro.
This isn't just significant because it's a huge coincidence, but it's because both of these levels have actually used 120 FPS frame perfects abundantly, with Amethyst having about 13 frame perfects on 120 FPS. But with practice, these aren't still too bad. The brain is really good at predicting timing. So many studies reach the conclusion that humans can perform timings on the scale of milliseconds. So let's answer the question, how hard is this level? Just how hard is Geometry Dash's hardest level? Well, as we mentioned, 108 frame perfects, combined with a little bit of memory, combined with a fast pace, and fluctuating visibility overall. Zoink is the game's top player right now, and he's also the verifier of Thinking Space 2, a feat which took him 83,913 attempts. Almost a year later, the level only has one victor, and it's 21 places above Slaughterhouse. That's how hard Geometry Dash is right now, but it's not how hard Geometry Dash will be in the next couple of years or so. If there's one thing that the Geometry Dash community has done consistently, it's push the boundaries more and more and more, and hardest levels keep overtaking each other.
Oh my god!
It's seen so often that we've even got levels lined up to be the next top 1. After Thinking Space 2, it's expected to be Grief, which is being verified by top player Doggy Dasher, same one that verified Slaughterhouse, and after Grief, it's expected to be Vehemence, which is being verified by the player A6. But if we're asking the question, how hard can Geometry Dash be, there is a level a step above even those, entering Eternus. Many people in the community actually consider this level impossible. Regardless of whether you think it's impossible or not, you can definitely look at it and tell this won't be verified within the next 2 years. There's a lot of debate around the topic within the community too. This level is not on the demon list. The current record, I think, is Trick's run of Eternus from 79% to 100. And if you thought Slaughterhouse sounded impossible with a frame perfect counter, just listen to this. Yeah, that's right. A lot of the level takes place in 4 times speed, which is also the fastest pace in the game, and you can just tell it's a step above anything else that's currently been verified. This level also has 240 FPS frame perfects in some places, I think at least, which do creep their way up to human limits. They are possible, no doubt they aren't possible. It's just very difficult to hit them consistently with the biological limitations of a human. This study here looked at how precisely humans can time fast rhythmic actions, and it describes how the main standard deviation in timing is roughly around 6 milliseconds. 240 FPS frame perfects being less than that doesn't necessarily make them impossible, but it does make them quite inconsistent to hit. A neuron spike itself takes about 1 millisecond, so I think it's pretty safe to assume that a level with like 50 frame perfects on 960 FPS is probably impossible. Within the community though, everyone always seems to decide when a level is considered genuinely impossible, but then just someone with a ridiculous amount of patience and precision comes along and just beats it. Somebody that just doesn't care that 240 FPS frame perfects are biologically very difficult to hit and are more than happy to play with kind of a luck-based element. Needless to say, this level is wildly more difficult than Thinking Space 2. It's not even close. And it's a level that I think will take years to verify, but I do think that it can be done. The fact that it already has progress on it is significant, and I just feel like even if it takes millions and millions of tries, somebody's going to come along and beat it one day. It's at this point in the video that I'd like to introduce the impossible levels list. As you can probably guess, it's a list of levels that are believed to be impossible or nearly impossible, on which Eternus is ranked 569th. Wow. Now, look, the hardest level on this list is called Open Window, but I really don't think there's much point going into it in the same level of detail that we went into with Slaughterhouse or Booba or Eternus or Thinking Space 2, because when you need 6,000 FPS to beat it, I think it's pretty safe to assume that it's kind of impossible, without checkpoints at least. Here's the thing though, this level actually does have progress on it. It's just very, very small. But I bring this up because I wanted to make another point with Eternus. Even with all the studies and all the research and all the facts we've looked at today, I couldn't answer this question for myself. What if somebody sat themselves down and decided to play a level perhaps even harder than Eternus, and they didn't stop? I'm talking the only thing to stop them from practicing the game would be death, with the exception of like sleep and water and stuff, obviously. Would they eventually beat it? So I did what everybody else does in this generation and asked ChatGPT. This is the prompt I put in, which is pretty much quite close to everything I just said. And to spare you all the gory details, it basically said no. But it also did say that you can hit 360 FPS frame perfects and 480 FPS frame perfects with a bit of luck. I didn't even follow up because I wanted to know how to make an impossible level in Geometry Dash. Maybe you could go about putting a bunch of 960 FPS frame perfects everywhere, but I think there's an easier way to make an impossible level. If there is one single takeaway from this video that's more important than anything else, it's that Geometry Dash levels are not played by reaction, but by prediction. And that prediction gets better and better with training. So, logic would dictate that to make an impossible level, we would have to make the level unpredictable. Let's keep things simple. Let's use 60 FPS frame perfects. These jumps will be invisible until the last frame at which you can jump over them. Booba Wamba would be so much harder if the objects you had to memorize weren't stuck at specific percentages and could appear at any point in the level. But what's so impossible about this idea? When you make a level unpredictable, you force humans to rely on their reaction time, which is much, much less than the duration of a frame perfect as we've discussed. And even the absolute most elite can almost never reach below 100 milliseconds. A level like that might just be impossible. Just imagine a game like Temple Run with frame perfects. It's a similar comparison in that they're both platformer games, kinda, but the main difference is that not only is Temple Run endless, the terrain is also automatically generated as you play. Now, it would be one thing if Temple Run had frame perfect jumps, but another thing entirely if Temple Run was to summon those frame perfect jumps 0.0167 seconds before you're able to make them. That would be completely unfair. Or imagine a boss fight in a game that telegraphed a one-shot kill merely 0.0167 seconds before firing it. That would be completely unfair. Why? Because science has proven that humans can't react in time. That's why I think leaning towards unpredictability in any way is the best and most efficient way, or at least most reliable way to make a game hard, and that applies to Geometry Dash 2. Will Eternus be verified one day? Probably. Will Open Window be verified one day? Probably not. But if you want to specifically engineer a level to cause the most human suffering possible, then take advantage of the fact that in 2.2 RobTop introduced the random trigger, and just go ballistic. An unpredictable level is so much harder to practice, as you can clearly see. Anyway, I hope this video has helped somewhat to answer the question, how hard is Geometry Dash? The more precise an answer you try to give, the more complex it gets to give that answer. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to anyone who's made it to the end, and thank you anyone who watched this video. This was very, very interesting to make, as somebody who loves the game so much and is slowly but surely improving. This video is far from perfect. It's not going to be 100% accurate, especially as a lot of the studies suggested to me were suggested by AI, which makes mistakes quite a lot. All of them will be in the description with links, as well as every single person whose showcase footage was used in this video. Another thing is that the Geometry Dash community has so many lists to a point where there are lists of lists. Some of them contain impossible levels, some of them contain possible levels, some of them contain both, but I still think we were able to reach a conclusion, and a fairly decent conclusion, without looking at all of them. But on that note, thanks so much again for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe. I plan on making plenty more videos talking about certain Geometry Dash topics and video game topics. And if you do decide to stick around for that, then I will see you guys another time. Goodbye.